Uh, Honorable Comrade Rajan Nagar Sahab, President, All India Bank Employees Association, Honorable Sri C.H. Venkat Chalan Sahab, General Secretary AIBEA, Honorable Anurji, Joint Secretary and General of AIBEA and General Secretary, Provincial Bank Employees Association, other office bearers of the AIBEA, and other distinguished participants in the webinar and friends at large. I deem it a privilege to join you on this momentous occasion of celebrating and thinking aloud on a little more than 50 years of bank nationalization in India. This is a moment which is not an ordinary moment. But before I really start saying things which I believe are related to the subject, I must show my gratitude to the AIBA family in general, the Honorable President and the Honorable General Secretary, AIBA, Mr. Sri Venkat Chalan Sahab, for inviting me to say a few words by way of a lecture in this webinar. But at the same time, I must compliment you for this program, which has run more than 3 weeks now and is slated for a month. This is the right occasion when we are evaluating the impact of a momentous decision, a political economic decision taken by Mrs. Indira Gandhi way back in July 1969. It's a really, really important day because it falls as part of Golden Jubilee celebrations of that momentous decision. I must tell you, Mr. President, Honorable Secretary, AIBA, Mr. Venkat Chalan Sahab, that I was a witness to that momentous occasion. Not that I was in Delhi and with those who took the decision, but I was very active on the campus. And I vividly remember those exciting days and exciting moments leading to this momentous decision. Being a part of that left democratic circles in the society in general and the campus life in particular, I am aware of the excitement and I'm aware of the reception which bank nationalization received then. And it is very natural for me to be a little nostalgic about that moment. We took it as a decision which was in the nature of transformation. Transformation of not only the economy of India, but also society at large, and politics in particular. You are all people who are well versed in the theoretics and the practical aspects of nationalization. You are part of that milieu and that part of that intellectual and ideological framework, which was largely responsible for this decision. And often we forget that this decision was a philosophic, ideological, political, economic decision. And it has to be seen in that context. It was not a simple economic decision. It was a far-reaching political economic decision taken by the Indian state, led by a person who had certain ideological movements, an ideological bent of mind. And this was not only the product of a particular mind, a particular leader who was a great decisive leader for certain regions. It was also the product of a great legacy of ideas, and more so, a legacy of struggles of the working class and toiling masses. First as part of Indian freedom movement, and then after independence, a part of wider working class movement of which you are a part, to which you contributed richly, both as a working class movement as well as a movement rooted in and rooted for the bank employees. You had great leaders, one of which you have just mentioned, Naval Kishore Choudhary ji, with whom I shared the dais at least once. I had the privilege. You had great leaders, Prabhatkar, Parwana Saab, and great Naval Kishore Choudhary, and now luminaries, some of whom you are present here. A great contribution to make. Now, what was that context? And what I am saying is that context is not confined to a particular moment in history, that is 1969, and a year or so before or after. I take it as a continuation of a process of ideological development of the Indian working class and Indian political class. I would like to start with freedom movement. Freedom movement, apart from many other things, also a movement which was a democratic in nature and content. And when I talk of democracy, it had a socialist element in it, a socialist element in it. There were leaders like Jawaharlal Nehru who believed in Fabian socialism. You know how he interacted with some of the great leaders of Fabian socialists while in India, include George Bernard Shaw, Sidney and Betty Swift, Annie Besant, etc., etc. Had a background. The man who later became the first Prime Minister of India. We had people even in Subhash Chandra Bose, was associated with the National Planning Committee, etc., etc. So this had, our freedom movement was just not a political movement. Basically, it was a political movement, primarily, but it was also a social transformation movement, which had certain objectives and ideals, which later on shaped the policy of Indian state. And this led, and since I have to confine this lecture to about 45 or 50 minutes, I would serve the cause better by being brief. That led to the passing of resolution in 1956, the socialist pattern of the Indian society, socialist policy, socialist framework was accepted by the ruling party. And later on, as we know, that this was tried to be implemented in the Industrial Policy Resolution. Yes, we have 1948 Industrial Policy Resolution, which was not that explicit, but 1956 Industrial Policy Resolution did talk of taking control of the commanding heights of Indian economy. And you will rightly see at the time of nationalization of our 14 commercial banks in July 1969, this word crops up in the statement from the government, commanding heights. Later modified, but it was commanding heights. It came from 1956 resolution, Industrial Policy Resolution. It had the background of passing of the resolution of socialist pattern of society. And Indiraji, which was the heir of not only Jawaharlal Nehru, which he was in any case, but also heir of that great freedom movement, which had a socialist content in it. And that socialist content was possible because of the working class movement and left parties' contributions. Now, this was the battle. Yes, there were issues. Some of those issues which come up for discussion. If you take economic issues, economy was stagnating at a very low rate of growth, which in the mid-60s showed a slump. But even otherwise, it was 3 to 4% growth rate, which India was witnessing, which was later, rightly or wrongly, called Hindu rate of growth. I remember Rajkrishna telling me, or Rajkrishna highlighting Hindu growth rate, that was stagnating at 3-4%. We had times when India witnessed 2 droughts, successive droughts around mid-60s, leading to a collapse, a negative growth rate in agriculture, a sector which even then contributed substantially to GDP. Even today, in terms of population dependent on agriculture, it has a great contribution to make. It was showing negative growth rates. The overall GDP rate also became negative. Foreign reserves slumped and inflation reached double digit, more than 10%. This was some sort of a crisis. We cannot forget that India had to depend on PL480 grains to feed its population. Talk of green revolution was there, but how to make it possible? This was the context. Economic crisis of a sort, which had a telling effect on the economy and more importantly on people of India, particularly those teeming millions of India who were the toiling millions and who were left uncared. And in spite of freedom, of a short political freedom, they were not having economic freedom from poverty, hunger, misery, squalor, and a subhuman existence. This was a situation, economic. Social situation, obviously, could not have remained unaffected. This is the period when you see in some parts of India, peasantry was rising and challenging the legitimacy of Indian state. It had a background. Politically, if we come to the ruling class was passing through a churn of a sort. And you need not be told, you are people who have seen those times, who have experienced those times. Some of you must have met those people who were the men and women who shaped the destiny of India then. This is the time when political system was witnessing a churn. The ruling party, after death of Lal Bahadur Shastri, particularly, was witnessing this churn. And there was internal fight. Yes, that's a part of the story. But those who related to only that part and forget the overall philosophic, ideological background of the leader, and for that matter, forget the social and economic context of India, failed to do justice with the process. Yes, there was an individual element. Syndicate was there. Deputy Prime Minister and Finance Minister, as you know, Morarji Desai, went for social control of banks, which didn't materialize in real practice. And finally, yes, also for defeating the rival group, Mrs. Indira Gandhi, the then Prime Minister, took a plunge and took the decision. And this decision was momentous. This gave her an image. This gave her some advantage politically. But why did it give her that advantage? Because this decision affected the fortunes of teeming millions of India. This decision affected the agriculturists, the poor peasantry, and it also affected small artisans. It affected small and medium enterprises. Those industries, even those industries which did not could not take advantage of the corporate lending practices. Private banks catered largely to corporates because their directorship and the directorship of the industries overlapped. There was an oligarchy in the industries, oligarchy control, and also lending. Naturally, there was a banking system which catered to the needs of the corporates only, corporate industrial houses, which control the banks, which own the banks and which control the banks and manage the banks largely for their monopoly and oligopoly profits at the cost of the larger benefit accruing to the larger industrials, even in larger industrial sector, which consisted of SMEs, small enterprises, etc., and definitely the large sector of agriculture, primary sector, and the small businesses. Now, this was the situation. Naturally, in this situation, this decision came as a big relief to all, relief to agriculturists, relief to small enterprises, relief to small craftsmen, tradesmen, and poor people in general. This came as a relief. And you know better, probably, than I do. I used to teach in my class All India survey, agriculture credit survey. This 54-55 conducted survey. What was the picture? Then, commercial banks contributed only 0.9% to credit. 0.9%. Cooperatives provided 3.1%. So, institutional credit in the form of cooperatives and commercial banks, 0.9%, provided only 4% of credit. And 96% of credit was coming from non-institutional sources, as reported by All India Credit Survey report, which was out in 1955, a decade earlier. Now, this was the situation, even in 69. What was the situation? Only 22% of the branches were rural branches. Only 22%. And the rest were semi-urban and urban. 85, more than 3/4 of credit were going to those sectors, which were not priority sectors. Now, this was the situation when it was taken. So it had a context, economic context, a crisis, social context of deprivation of people who were people at the margin. And politically, it was a context where the rich and the mighty had control over the economy, society, and polity. Now, so this was a change from a particular stage of development of the economy, society, and polity. Even if we forget the ideological left and democratic aspect of it. India needed development. After independence, India needed economic development. How do you have economic development? The ruling class realized that India cannot witness economic development without the state's support. Nowhere in the world economic development has taken place without the support of the state part in the initial stages. Even in India, during the British time, you read the history of railway development. It was the state which supported the private sector. In Britain, a state supported the initial stages of capitalist development. Capitalism, which boasts of free enterprise and is boast of individual initiative and individual endeavor, forget that even capitalism never prospered without the support of a state power. It was always the state. East India Company was supported by the British Crown. It was the state which supported. In Britain, France, and Germany, even in Japan in the initial stages. So it is here a state was needed. Without a state, they could not prosper. They could not achieve whatever they could have done. So they needed it. And since credit being the central factor in any economic development process, without credit, they could not have done. So even they needed this for their development. And it is in this context that Indian state decided, under the leadership of Mrs. Gandhi, to take over the banks. 14 commercial banks were taken over. I need not go into the details, who people, Huxer, etc. involved, and how this decision. Yes, it had a political element. It had a drama about it. It had its immediate political drama, political characters playing a role. But it had a larger background. It has a larger context, and that has to be kept in mind. Now, so far, the second part is concerned. You have data. I did not make it a boring lecture, but you have reports, and every day you talk of that how number of branches increased, and the number of branches increased many, many times. Number of banks, commercial banks increased from 73 to 91. Number of bank branches phenomenally increased from 8,000 to a little less than 1.5 lakh branches. The deposits increased. The rural branches increased from 22% to 35%. And the deposits increased. Credit increased phenomenally. There are figures, and these figures are astronomical, to say the least. These figures are available for anybody. Reserve Bank provides these data in terms of number of branches, rural branches, amount of deposits, amount of credit disbursed, and there was astronomical increase. But the impact has to be pinpointed in certain sectors. Green revolution could not have been possible without nationalization. And political economists often cite this as one of the reasons why banks were nationalized in the first place. Green revolution, and think of a situation without green revolution, India would not have been self-sufficient in food supply. Today we have surplus food supply. This is not to suggest everybody is getting food as he or she requires. It is never possible because of the distribution of income. It's not the availability of food which makes everybody satisfied with food. It is also important how much income you have. some of you know better than I do, that during 1943 great famines, Bengal witnessed that, Rajanagar Sahib come from that state. It was not the shortage of food which led to the famine. It was the breakdown of entitlement, as Amar Sen has very rightly theorized. It was not the unavailability of food supply that led to the famine. Food supply was there. The famine took place because of breakdown of entitlement. And entitlement is a function dependent on income and employment. That was it. Even today, the poverty is stricken. We have a republic of hunger. In spite of the fact that we have sufficient food supply. Sometimes we say surplus food supply. FCI go down surplus. But this is a fact. This is a necessary condition that we have enough supply of food grains. It's not a necessity. It's not a sufficient condition to feed everybody. There are other factors. But first thing is first. And this was possible largely because of Green Revolution. And Green Revolution was successful largely because of bank nationalization. The political economists are unanimous that Green Revolution would not have been possible without this momentous decision of bank nationalization and expansion of branches, expansion of deposits, expansion of credit, particularly to those who were farmers and small farmers in particular. So this was the impact. Secondly, whatever little industrialization took place in the post-60s situation, it could not have been possible without expansion of credit to industry, particularly those sections of industry which were outside the corporate framework, particularly medium and small enterprises, craftsmen, and finally the trading, small traders, craftsmen. They could not have got credit if the private banks would have continued and banks were now nationalized. People not really appreciate, but those who were the beneficiaries know it better that they could approach the banks in spite of inefficiency and corruption which is associated with some of the activities of even public sector banks. They could approach the banks. Priority sector lending was done. People who could not have thought of approaching the bank for credit did get credit, did get benefited. And this is the real story. Now, the last part, which for me is the most important part today, because that is where you have a role. You have a great role to play, is that this limited measure of bank nationalization, which was historic in nature, both in terms of its impact on economy, society, and polity, is under question. It's under challenge. How this came about? It's an irony that the same Mrs. Indira Gandhi, who had a socialist background, I have reasons to believe that she had a socialist temperament. She was sympathetic to socialism because she inherited that legacy of Nehruvian economy, Nehruvian ideological framework. Even that Mrs. Indira Gandhi, who took the historic decision of nationalization of commercial banks, which had far-reaching consequences for economy, society, and polity, and her own rule, perpetuation of her own rule, had to take a decision in 1981 and 82, which was the beginning of privatization, liberalization and privatization. People must accept, it is a historical fact, I remember having delivered lectures in Patna and some other places on IMF loan and conditionalities attached to $5 billion loan, which Mrs. Gandhi contracted from International Monetary Fund. And I did not tell my friends and comrades from Bengal because it was Patna movement was largely inspired by Bengal movement. And I remember having delivered lectures and very vocally go on that issue in a number of places. What was that, those conditionalities which India accepted? I would like to give benefit of doubt to Mrs. Gandhi because India was then facing a crisis and India had to go for a $5 billion loan from the IMF. And IMF, as you know, its character imposed certain conditions. And what are the conditions? In one word and in one line, it was the same conditionality which could be summed up in a theoretical premise: liberalization, privatization, and globalization, which later on became very popular for discussion, particularly the left and other circles. If you go into those conditionalities, we had to accept privatization, downsizing the state, public sector, encouraging privatization, import substitution, giving way to import liberalization, the pricing policy, administered prices giving way to market-determined prices. These were the conditions. Monopolies Commission to be scrapped. These were the conditions. These conditions summed up can be summed up in liberalization, privatization, and globalization. Because when you liberalize the state regulation and control, you go for privatization and disinvestment. You substitute the present administered prices system by market-determined prices. And if you decide go for import liberalization, what you are really doing is you are liberalizing the economy, you are privatizing the economy, and you are globalizing the economy. I'm not saying that that was not the result of compulsion of the tongue. Therefore, I would like to give benefit of doubt to Mrs. Gandhi, but this was accepted. It's a historical fact. And unfortunate part is that this was carried through. I remember in 1985, along with Prabhat Patnaik and K. Kabra and some others, we organized a national seminar at the Indian Institute of Public Administration and warned the nation that this is just after Rajiv Ji had taken over after the sad demise assassination of Mrs. Gandhi, that we are going in a direction which would be disaster for the economy, for the society, and even political democracy, of whatever political democracy we had. But this continued. It was much later in 1991, with fanfare, Narasimha Rao, through his finance minister, Manmohan Singh, great Manmohan Singh, this new economic policy was introduced. But little thought is given generally to the background. It was a process. And this process was influenced not only by internal politics, but external politics as well. After the loss of colonies, as a result of freedom movement, as a result of independence, India got Pakistan also came into existence, and some other developing countries. The Western world practically lost the sources of raw materials and the market. They needed it. They could not have captured us physically, but through the instrumentality of global economic institutions, IMF, World Bank, later on WTO, they introduced policy measures, ideology-driven policy measures, which were serving their interests, and sometimes for compulsion, local compulsions, sometimes ideological reorientation, and sometimes sheer maneuvering and machinations. The third world countries are sometimes under real pressure of the Western powers, imperialist powers. We had to accept very those policies which were against the larger interests of the nation states. Economy, society, polity, and above all, democracy. Democracy is indivisible. Democracy means economic democracy, means social democracy, means political democracy. But if the economy is not democratic, economy is controlled by internal and external oligarchs, how democracy is possible in society and politics? But this is a reality which have to contend with. And as you know, except the left parties, everybody surrendered. Every party surrendered. Most of them gladly accepted it, a great reform. This is not to suggest that reforms are not required. It is not to suggest every state control and licensing and everything was right and free from corruption and inefficiency and deficit. This is not to suggest. But throwing the baby with the bath water is a disaster, which has to be accepted. But this is, most of them eulogize, most of them sang songs in praise of new policy, and some of them surrendered, except left parties. Left parties challenged this. The simple fact is that left parties did oppose, always opposed. And I was part of that great legacy and struggle. And AIBEA has always in the forefront. I remember having listened to Rajan Nagar Sahab, Venkat Chalam Sahab, a number of times, and many other leaders, Gurdas Das Gupta, when I attended your conference in Delhi, when he was President, Jaipal Reddy Sahab, you remember the date, year. But I was wrong. You did oppose. The bank employees did oppose. Insurance employees did oppose. Working class movement led by left parties did oppose. It's a different story that their opposition was heard or not, but they did oppose. I was part of that. And I remember having participated in those struggles. Here in Patna, in Calcutta, some other places. And I always consider that as a privilege. Now, this was the background. But we often forget that this ideological shift, this shift is not only because of some individuals or some parties. Yes, parties make a difference. Yes, every party is not the same. Yes, every individual is not the same. But let us not forget that on this, Congress collapsed, left its earlier stand, and out rightist and communalist parties embraced it with fanfare. Those Manmohan Singh, who is respected for many reasons, and rightly so, was not a BJP man, an RSS man. But he was the author. And I want to say that he was not the author. Real author was sitting in Washington. Real author was the imperialist powers, World Bank, IMF, World Bank, and later on WTO. They were the real authors. The ideological leaders. When Socrates was asked to take poison, Socrates was not taking part in a revolution. He was the intellectual leader who was asked to die by taking poison. So intellectual leadership, ideological leadership is important. We have to trace everything to ideological leadership, intellectual leadership, and those who are in command of ideology, those who are in command of the philosophy of life and society have to be held primarily responsible. We often quarrel about individuals, but we forget that the root is that fountainhead of ideology, which has to be attacked, and this needs to be attacked. Left parties did attack that ideological formulation, and this continued. As I told you, from 81, I'm a long conditionality, right or wrong, under pressure or not pressure, continued with Rajiv Ji. 85, I told you, Prabhat Patnaik is still living, Kabra is still with you, and many others, we organized that. And since 91, we are crying hoarse about new education policy. Continued by Vajpayee Ji. Very natural for him, because it's out and out a rightist party, rightist formation, economic terms. Continued. And later on, even about UPA 1, UPA 2, this was continued. Of course, the only saving grace was the first UPA were part of us, part of the government. A lot of pressure was exerted by left parties, even though they were not taking part in the governance. They're supporting the government, supporting the government. Later on, you saw how this government, UPA 2, the support of the left parties withdrew. There was this nuclear deal, etc. I remember someday, some back, I have not seen, somebody told me that you are part of a film. How could it be? I never participated in a film. How could it be? No, this is a part of I'm seeing, and some people were excited. When I asked and discovered this was accidental prime minister, what happened is that I was protesting. Anuji is saying, probably this is not to highlight my contribution. I was part of a left protest march in Patna, protesting against nuclear deal. And that was somehow, somewhere, these days, this was picked up by the filmmaker and made part of accidental prime minister whenever they saw me with the raging slogans. And see, how is this professional film of this part? Then I realized this, they picked up from somewhere, from roads where I was part of, and this was a great tribute to your movement. I was participating somewhere, nuclear deal. Now this left part is different, but this policy continued. UPA 2 continued. And now it's a full bloom. It's a full bloom. And since I am completing my time, I must tell you that real challenge lies here. The Indian state, as it consists of today, its class base, its ideological base is the real challenge. You know it better than I do. The old challenges come from that. I remember during UPA 1, UPA 2, when financial sector reforms and many others were talked of, and some decisions were taken. In Vajpayee's time, there was a full-fledged Ministry of Disinvestment. They didn't have the courage to call it a Ministry of Privatization, but they feared it. But what is this investment? I remember your great struggles, even in UPA 1, UPA 2. In spite of your struggles, they went for increase in FDI. Even in certain sectors, allowing the corporates to take over, virtually take over, dismantle public sector, and privatization. And now we face a situation where we do have a prospect of completely losing control of public ownership and management over banks. It's a real danger. Danger is real. But this danger has to be fought by fighting the Indian state as it exists today. Indian state is reflected in the government, and this government has to be fought with. How do we fight this? We may fight an individual, This individual may be there, may not be there. What about that class basis of this Indian state? How to fight that? And often we are forced to fight the individuals rather than fighting the policy. We have not been able to get along and gather around parties to our point of view that, okay, the government must go. But more important is policies must go. Philosophy must go. The ideological basis of the Indian state must be changed, transformed. And if it is not possible to amend it, overthrow it. How is it possible? It's possible first by achieving some kind of an ideological success, and then uniting all the toiling masses. Not only bank employees can be a vendor. Working class, organized working class movement is even today limited. The entire agriculture sector is today facing the real crisis of trade. Bihar has been a place of peasant movement, as you know. It was a part of Bengal presidency. Under Swami Sahajanand Saraswati, in the 30s and 40s of last century, Bihar saw that peasant movement, which later on became the All India movement. 1936 Lucknow Congress, Jawaharlal Nehru presiding, Swami Sahajanand Saraswati becoming the president of All India Kisan, and so on. Leading to Bihar becoming the first state to have abolished Jamindari. And the first attack on the feudal social economic system. The labor market, capital market, and land market, all woven together, giving the stage of feudal or semi-feudal formation. This was attacked, and now we see there is no peasant movement in Bihar. No peasant. Now, if there is no peasant movement, where is the movement of industrial in a state like Bihar, which has virtually no industries? Where was this movement? Yes, banking employees are organized movement. Yes, even their informalization has taken place. Banks are under attack. Financial sector are under attack. And one of the best ways is to make it informal. Make it informal. Marx talked in 1867 in Capital, there are three ways to exploit the workers. First, increasing working hours to get more surplus value. Second, lowering the wages. But these have limits. Increasing the working hours has an upper limit, Marx said. Marx gave an example of a girl working for 3 days continuously in diet. The news item was published in London Times, referred to in Capital Volume 1. Increasing working hours, 30 hours. We still celebrate mating. But what is the petition in private sector? Working hours. Stress level is working. Insecurity is working. It has issues, has health, has art component. Wages are reduced. No recruitment. Contract workers. Suboptimal wages. This is another way Marx talked of. And the third, after these two have reached their limits, through technology. And technology replaces labor. And organic composition of capital changes and so on. I'm not talking about capital and Marx anymore. But all these measures are being used by the modern industrial class and capitalist and corporate class. They are increasing the working hours. They are reducing the wages. And through technology, they are squeezing the working class of whatever is left little. Informalization is taking place. Arjun Sen Gupta Committee report said 93% is informal sector workers. 0.5% workforce has any sort of social security. This is the report, National Commission on Enterprises report. presented by Arjun Sen Gupta. During the preparation of that report, I was invited and I was part of that. I knew him and all that. Now, but this report was not even discussed in Parliament. Not discussed in Parliament. We said that 77% of population has 20 rupees or less in 64, 65 framework. Now, the reference here, their per day income is less than 20 or less. This was the report. When Dadabhai Naoroji talked of in the 19th century that the per capita income of India is less than half of the amount which is spent on Indian prisoner in British jail. It led to a freedom movement. It had a great flip to freedom movement. And now Arjun Sen Gupta Committee report saying 20 or less income per day for 836 million people. No impact, not discussed. What is this situation? Working hours in the informalization of even formal sector is taking place. And the greatest victim is the banking sector, financial sector, insurance sector. No employment, no recruitment. Working conditions are deteriorating. On the one hand, ILO talks of decent conditions of work. On the other hand, we are having no conditions to work. Subhuman conditions of work. More work, less wages, and strenuous hours, stress level. Now, this is the time when an organized working class movement like yours can play a vanguard. It has, in some way, it has the potential to be a leader of a working class movement. I know its limitations, but I have yet to see any other working class movement which has a philosophical mooring, philosophical orientation, ideological mooring, ideological orientation, and a resolute message to pass on to the working class. I'm yet to see any other. I'm yet to see any other. People are collapsing. Movement is collapsing one after another. They are taking advantage, but you have stood the test of time. And I expect that this is going to be only silver lining. In other words, a dark, cloudy sky. And I see a future. I see a future. I'm not a pessimist, Mr. Venkatachalam. I have a great faith and conviction in your determination to stand erect and fight the mighty and the strong. And nowhere in the history, working class is finally defeated. Yes, there was a French Revolution. And finally, after Napoleon, even Napoleon, but there was a revolution, Russian Revolution. Those who say, what happened? Many things happened because of French Revolution. Many things happened because of Russian Revolution. No revolution has ever failed, finally. Because even if you see it failing after some time in its impact, it has always played a role. It has always played a role. It's a great inspiration. Similarly, trade union movement in general, maybe your banking union in particular, may have seen some ups and downs, but still you are there. And that is the greatest strength, not only for you, for the entire working class and for the society at large. And the real task, real challenge is to force the Indian state, question the legitimacy of Indian state, particularly in relation to its policies, to economy, society, and politics, and humanity, I would rather say. Question the legitimacy of Indian state and be the leader of that movement, a great movement, a revolution of a sort, which sees the overthrow of this state, but which is anti-people, anti-working class, and anti-humanity. I think this is the challenge. And this is the challenge which you have taken up rightly. And this challenge will be taken up further in future. I am part of that great struggle which you have rightly launched, not today, not yesterday, many years back. And you have a great history, a great legacy, a great contribution. I'm part of that legacy in a very small manner because I happen to be knowing some of you and happen to be participating in some of your struggles and struggles of society. But as a friend, as a well-wisher, as someone who participated with you, would only say that, as you have rightly done earlier, expand it, establish a linkage, which you have already done, or always been doing, with other working class movements, not only banking sector, not only insurance sector, which you are in any case doing, but also in other sectors of society. And above all, the middle classes, which are suffering. Middle class, because the kind of economic policies, the kind of social policy, and the kind of politics which are thrust upon us are anti-democratic, anti-people, anti-humanity. Therefore, you have the rightful basis, legitimate basis for a wider unity of all working class, not only working class, but all those sections of society which are suffering, which I call teeming millions of India. Be the leader, be the vanguard of the great struggle of teeming millions of India against powers that even today are trying to subjugate it, to keep it in bondage, which it will never succeed. Liberate it, be the liberator, be that great force which unites and fight against forces which are forces of bondage, be the forces of liberation. And I'm sure you will prove that. And in that great struggle, I join you. Today, I'm sorry, I don't know the tributes or the good things which Anuruddha talked of, which I deserve. But one thing is very right. Anuruddha has seen in Patna that I am always where people need me. I'm always where workers need me. I'm always where suffering people need me, forgetting my position, forgetting my age. And this is what I'm probably have tried to do. And today I commit myself and take a pledge to be part of your greater struggle, a great movement, which is not only your movement, it's a movement for the liberation of people, not only in India, anywhere in the world. With these words, I would rather now like to conclude because you have a slot of 45-50 minutes. I have already exceeded it. But if I don't know if any questions or any presentations are there, this interaction is there, I'm always available. I can take questions. Thank you. I'm grateful to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Professor Saib.
Thank you very much, Professor Sir. It was a lecture so authentic, so clear, and we are highly inspired to continue our struggle. And as you rightly said, we take your advice that we should establish more and more linkage with the other sections of the working class and fight against the inhuman, anti-people, anti-worker machinations of the present rulers. We assure you that we shall continue the struggle in the days to come. We shall involve everybody. And thank you very much for your lecture today. I request Comrade Anirudh Kumar to propose a vote of thanks. Anirudh.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you very much, sir. It has been enlightening. All of us have been benefited, immensely benefited by your wonderful speech, not only of the present situation, right from nationalization to till such time till now, what we have done and what requires to be done. We have guided us. We are very much thankful to you, and we have also acknowledged contribution of All India Bank Employees Association in opposing all the uh, moves of present government as well as the previous governments. That we will continue doing the same and oppose what the government is doing against the interest of the banking fraternity and entire working class. And we will also have interaction with you and all the like-minded party, as you suggested. AIBA will see to it that we fight together these policies of the government. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. And before we close, as usual, announcement about tomorrow program. Tomorrow is again a very interesting webinar. The lecturer will be Dr. Balchandar Kango from Aurangabad. He is actually a medical doctor, but he did not continue his profession. He is fully dedicated to trade union and also people's struggle. And he is a wonderful progressive thinker, trade unionist, and social activist, and also a political leader. He is one of the secretaries of the Communist Party of India. He will be talking to us tomorrow. The topic will be profit for the people. Profit means nothing wrong. It must be for the masses and the people. So on that topic, he will be discussing tomorrow in his lecture. It will be equally very, very interesting. So today I thank the large participation, and particularly our Bihar comrades. I must congratulate Anirudh. A lot of people have joined. Wonderful. Tomorrow also kindly repeat the same by joining more in number. Today we had some problem about this live streaming in this Facebook and YouTube. Night we will rectify and upload it there. Don't worry. And with this, with the permission of our president, we thank you and say good night, and we meet tomorrow 7 o'clock for the next program. Thank you.
Thank you.